Hello and welcome to Myth Monsters. My name is Erin and I'll be your host for these little snack bite-sized podcasts on folklore and mythical monsters from around the world. These podcasts focus on the actual cryptids, folklore and mythic monsters from global mythology, rather than focusing on the full stories of heroes and their big adventures. I'll also be dropping in some references that they have to recent culture and where you can see these represented in modern day content so that you can learn more and get as obsessed as I am about these absolute legends of the mythological world. I have finally recovered from the horrendous cold I had last week, and amazingly, I was on the radio this week for the first time ever. I had such a great time with BBC Essex, and I'm so excited to go back at Halloween for some more monster stories for my local community here in Essex in the UK. Speaking of monster stories though, let's just get straight into this one. This week, we're heading over to the US, specifically to West Virginia, where we have been before with cryptids, for a bizarre and locally beloved creature, the Flatwoods Monster. The Flatwood Monster is described as a 10 to 12 feet tall cryptid, with an ace of spades shaped head, with glowing orange orb-like eyes, long black spindly arms with 4 long fingers, and an almost dress going down to the floor where it hovers above the ground. It's sometimes depicted with an orange, red, green or purple glow to it, however these reports are far and few between. It's generally considered to be wearing a metallic-like armour, however no one really knows what's going on underneath it and what the monster actually looks like. There are arguments that the Flatwoods Monster is a reptilian creature underneath the armour, but I'm not too sure that based on the research that's strictly true. The wider thought is that this monster is actually extra-terrestrial, and that's definitely something new that we've never touched upon on the podcast before. The Flatwoods Monster lives, funnily enough, in the Flatwoods area of West Virginia, where it lives in deep forests. West Virginia is the mountain state and is well within Appalachia, where a whole load of monsters and cryptids come from within the US. It is a mountainous range and has a lot of history behind it, with creepy crawlies and creatures of mythical comparison. It generally avoids most human contact, actively shrilling and hissing at any humans that go past, but it isn't actually known for attacking people. However, it can accidentally hurt them. This comes down to the Flatwood Monster's powers, and they were able to levitate, which in itself is a pretty cool power, and they were also able to emit a strange gas, which smells like metallic sulphur, but is widely considered to be mustard gas. Mustard gas is incredibly dangerous for us humans, and was used in the wars to blind, suffocate and kill soldiers, with symptoms like throat irritation, vomiting, nausea that can last for several days after exposure. It's really nasty and it smells like chlorine and bleach mixed together. The monster is also able to move incredibly quickly through the forest canopy, mainly because of its ability to hover, but it tends to use this to get away from us rather than to chase us, which is a bonus, I suppose. It's widely believed that there is only one Flatwoods Monster, and realistically, we don't know very much about it. We also don't know what really is under the armour, and so we can't make any guesses either. Therefore, we don't know what it eats, how you could possibly kill it, although it does seem pretty peaceful, so why would you want to, I suppose. We also don't know how long it lives for, or how it survives within the harsh environment of the Appalachian Mountains, but the legend still lives on. So let's get on to etymology, and I bet you've already guessed this one. Flatwoods is where the monster is from in West Virginia, although it does have a couple of other names. It's also known as the Braxton County Monster, or Braxy, as Braxton is specifically the place it was seen. Or it's also called the Phantom of the Flatwoods, or the Green Monster. So there are quite a few nicknames, but they all come from the same origin of using the location of the sightings. The history of this monster, though, is interesting, but super short. The Flatwoods Monster was only discovered in the 1950s, specifically in 1952. A group of 3 children were playing football on September 12th, 1952, and they saw a bright light fly across the evening sky and land in a local farmer's field. They went and told their mums that they'd seen a UFO crash, and some locals went with the kids to check it out. Once they got there, one of the local dogs ran ahead and started barking, and then shortly came back with its tail between its legs, absolutely terrified. The group travelled a little further and found a pulsating ball of fire and smelt this mustard gas, which made their eyes and noses run. Then one of the farmers saw 2 small lights next to the fire and shone a torch on it, revealing the monster to the rest of the group. It hissed before gliding at them and hovering off into the night. The next morning, the locals told the newspapers and police, who went and investigated, but at the site only found that sickening, burnt, metallic odour still prevailing. They did also find tracks on their second visit, as well as a thick black unidentified liquid, which we now believe was most likely petrol from the car they fled in. In their investigation, they also found a number of other people from the area had had an experience over the previous week with what we believe to be the same monster, including one where a 21-year-old woman was in the hospital for 3 weeks after, although it doesn't specifically go into why or what her injuries were. Some reports from locals say that a UFO crashed into the field during that week, and the radio had cut out for 45 minutes when it did, and when it took off on September 13th at 6 a.m. in the morning, the same thing happened. On September 13th itself, a couple saw another monster with the same putrid smell and metallic armour, which they believed to be the Flatwoods Monster from the night before. However, they reported that the creature had a reptilian body on the top half instead of the telltale Ace of Spades style helmet, and it was concluded that they were 2 different monsters, and this was called the Frametown Monster instead. I probably won't cover this one separately, as there's not much else about it, but it's an interesting one to put alongside this as a kind of close cousin of this one, especially at around the same time. Now, the funniest part about this monster's history is that it stops there. It's never been sighted again. However, this monster sits between the term monster and the term alien, which is a whole different kettle of fish in the folklore space. It's not usually something cryptozoologists will look into, as aliens are generally not considered cryptids, but a whole other race off-planet. But this one is elusive and renowned enough to get away with it. Alien folklore, which is definitely not the word for interest in study into aliens, is incredibly close to cryptozoology in theory, and it definitely isn't a surprise with this being a US monster, where belief in aliens is particularly accepted, and sometimes embraced or even massively feared. I mean, Area 51 is in the US, and it's also a hot spot for conspiracy theorists, which does fit with the cryptid space because they, in theory, are conspiracies too sometimes. General belief in aliens worldwide started in around the Middle Ages, but even went back to the ancient Greeks and Romans who studied the stars and planets for the first time, and when considering life, it would be arrogant of us to assume that we were on our own. However, wider belief generally didn't start until the late 1800s and early 1900s, when science fiction was invented and kicked off the interest with Edison's Conquest of Mars by Garrett P. Serviss in 1888, and the works of H.P. Lovecraft, obviously the inventor of Cthulhu and the whole Lovecraftian universe. Alongside the moon landings in 1969, which massively propelled interest in space and aliens into the homes of normal working people, Area 51 was acquired in 1955, and rumours of alien activity in the facility were born in the 1960s, And alas, the first alien conspiracies came to life. And really, haven't left us. The debate is still fierce within every community and society in general. We've all seen Mars Attacks, though, let me just make that clear. That's how I think of aliens. However, does the Flatwood Monster technically earn the monster name? And for me, sure. It's monstrous, and we don't actually know if it is an alien, and that is the mystery to it. Of course, there are reports that it came down with a UFO, but the UFO was never found, and the monster has never been found again. So it's a case of it could be a cryptid, or it could be an alien. We just do not know. And that leads to the Myth Monster's seal of approval for being covered on the podcast. Of course, a really close creature to the Flatwoods Monster is Mothman, and this is geographically and descriptively. Mothman is described as being massive with those scary glow-in-the-dark eyes, who flies over Point Pleasant in West Virginia, which is only 2 hours away and is around 130 miles in the same state. And realistically, being the mountain state, West Virginia has many more monsters too. However, there's not really any other cryptid or myth monster to compare the Flatwoods Monster to, due to the alien-like appearance of it, and the frankly elusive nature of it only being seen once. But if we take all of this and debunk it with some real-life comparisons, it's also very similar to the explanation behind Mothman, or at least what we believe to be the explanation behind it, which is barn owls. Barn owls are really common within the Appalachian regions, and when you shine a light into owls' eyes, they glow back in a red or orange colour, and obviously they fly over the top of your head and they tend to look where they're going. Their wingspans certainly don't make them feel 10 to 12 feet tall, but if you don't see their bodies and you just see these floating red eyes going over your head, it might give you those cryptid vibes. Even with all the scepticism and the lack of sightings, the Flatwood Monster is generally really important to the Flatwoods region. Flatwoods is known as the home of the Green Monster, and even has a Flatwoods Monster Museum, where you can buy a lamp in the shape of the creature to take home with you, and I desperately want one. There's also a few crafted wooden chairs around the area it was first spotted in, painted to look like the monster, and they're actually known as the Monster Chairs, and I advise you go and visit them if you're around instead of trying to get into the actual sighting place, as this is now private property, and on the Flatwoods government website it does stress that you should not go looking for the actual place, as it will get you done for trespassing. But either way, this monster is still fully embraced by its community, and I, as a monster expert and lover of course, absolutely adore that. But now let's hop on to modern media. We actually have specific media on the Flatwoods Monster, which is really rare. The only thing we don't have is movies, so we do have a kind of empty category this week, which hasn't happened for a really long time, but nothing really matches the trope of this monster or could fit into this gap. So I've left it empty, with an exception of one kind of suggestion. For art though, I would really recommend having a look at independent art this week, because there are some really cool pieces on this one. They are of course a little bit creepy, but also could be a little bit cute. But go and have a look at what other people are making and support your local artists. In movies, we do realistically have this empty category, but I did find a documentary on Amazon Prime called The Flatwoods Monster, so there is that. Does it fall into TV? Does it fall into movie? Not sure, but I thought I'd throw it in there. For TV, we have a few in contrast, but it is mostly animated stuff. We have Uchu Sentai Kuranger, Adventure Time, Transformers, Mountain Monsters, The X-Files, Lost Tapes Encrypted, Negima, Yokai Watch, Space Dandy, Sergeant Frog, Project Blue Book, and The Legend of Koizumi. In video games we have the most, and that is Shadowverse, Happy Wars, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, Point Blank, Scribblenauts, Tomodachi Life, The Wonderful 101, Beautiful Joe 2, Space Harrier, Fallout 76, Cassette Beasts, Everybody's Golf 4, Ghostbusters World, Amagon, De Tonosama Appare Ichiban, Gaia Attack 4, KO Fighting Squadron, Moshi Monsters, Valkyrie Crusade, Wild Arms, Siren Blood Curse, Space Bomber, Tumble Pop, Taiko no Tatsujin, Dokodon Mystery Adventure, and UFOA Day in the Life. My book recommendation this week is a load of them. It's Flying Saucers and Monsters, West Virginia's Flatwoods Monster, by Melissa Kennedy and Gray Barker, or The Braxton County Monster, the cover-up of the Flatwoods Monster Revealed, by Frank Fescino, for more of you conspiracy theorists out there that want to know more about this one. Or if you're interested in more monsters from the Mountain State, if you're from there, or generally want to learn more about Appalachian monsters, check out the West Virginia Book of Monsters by George and John Dudding for this. But now it's time for Do I Think They Existed? It's an immediate no for this one, and I'm sorry for any die-hard believers, or people from West Virginia, or people from Flatwoods or Braxton. I am really sorry, but it's a no. I think this one crosses too far into the extraterrestrial space for it to be believable for me, at the very least. And of course, this is Do I Think They Existed? However, I also think this one really depends on your stance on aliens being on Earth. And for me, it's just not something I'm massively in on. Whilst I totally believe aliens are out there, the idea that they would be chilling on Earth in a forest in West Virginia out of any place makes absolutely no sense to me, bar maybe the chance to sing West Virginia Mountain Mama a million times over, because that's what I'd do if I lived in West Virginia. However, if this was more of a mythical monster-style monster, I think the Appalachian forests are the perfect place to find something like that. And we could definitely throw in some, we don't know very much about the deep forests of Appalachia to say a definitive yes. We could throw a few of those in there, just like we did with Mothman. It's also strange that we've only seen this monster one time and counted it as a cryptid. Usually there are some sightings within the last 50 years, and we don't even have that. It's been 70 years since a sighting. In fact, 72 years as of recording. And that makes it so much more interesting to me from that cryptid perspective too. Because you could see something in the woods and report about it one time, but it might not become a cryptid that everyone knows and a whole community embraces. This seems really unique to this monster, and I love that. I also love the idea of this monster. I'm thrilled that the locals love the idea of it too. It really reminds me of the Hodag and Mothman in terms of the community spirit, and that they come from this embrace of monsters in their local culture, with museums, events, architecture, and just a deep appreciation for history and culture that I don't think is as common anymore. And that, as a folklorist, makes me incredibly sad, but so happy to see people embrace their local history and their local monsters. But what do you think? Did the Flatwoods Monster roam the forests of West Virginia? Let me know on Twitter. I would love to know what you think about this one. It was a great monster this week, and one that tipped us into that realm of extraterrestrial beings, which we just will not cover much. In completely frank words, I probably won't cover anything like this again, and maybe it will convince me to open the doors a little bit. But has it? Maybe as a future gimmick episode, who knows? But next week, I am on my annual June break for just a week, just so that I don't have to worry about the scripts and researching, for just a little break and enjoy my free time. I am also heading over to Ireland for the first time for a work trip, so it's nice to be able to have a nice break where I don't have to worry about it and I'm also travelling. Of course, if I see anything mythological or folklory whilst I'm out there in Belfast, I will take some pictures and post them for you on socials. But we're back the week after, on Thursday the 3rd of July, when we are heading to Central America for the first time in ages, and we're looking at a duo dog spirit, the Cadejo. Keep an eye out for the black and white hounds whilst you're out drinking when we come back on the 3rd of July. For now though, thank you so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give a rating on the service you are listening on. I've got the Twitter for any questions or suggestions on what monsters to cover next, and I'd really love to hear from you. The social media handles for TikTok, YouTube, Threads and Instagram are Myth Monsters Podcast, and the Twitter is Myth Monsters Pod. But all of our content can be found at mythmonsters.co.uk, including some very cool merchandise, and you can find us on Good Pods, Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon if you want to help me fund the podcast too. Come join the fun though, share this with your pals, they might love me as much as you do. But for now, stay spooky, and I'll see you later babes.